Hello, everybody. I think I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces from this morning's session. Hello again. So this is going to be the session where I'm going to be talking a little bit more at a high-level overview about the new things that we've introduced in XAML and in the native UI framework for Windows 10. This was a session that was actually done by my boss's boss, Joe Stegman at Build, and I've taken over his deck and I'm trying to present it. I'm trying and channel Joe as much as possible, but he has a very, very interesting sense of humor, which I just cannot mimic. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, so like I said, this is a session about, that I want to introduce some of the new things that we've introduced in XAML, some of the improvements that we have done in the platform, and maybe, for those of you who are unfamiliar with XAML, just give you a little bit of an introduction into what it is, how you can get started, and what are the things that you can use to build apps that target the universal Windows platform, and how we have made it a little bit easier. So this is kind of an introduction for those of you who might be completely unfamiliar with what XAML is. I'm not going to give a big 101 course here, but just to give you an idea, XAML is basically the native UI framework for Windows 10. Native because it ships with the platform. Once you install Windows 10 on your device, you automatically get XAML installed and the SDK installed for you. Any apps that have been developed against XAML will have the capability to be run on your Windows 10 device. So, which means across all the breadth of all the device families that Windows 10 now supports, XAML can now run, and by extension, any app that you have written on XAML has the capability to run on all of those devices. Because it is a native UI framework, all our first-party experiences, as well as any third-party apps that have been written, are written on XAML. As of Windows 8 and 8.1, a lot of first-party experiences were already starting to get written on XAML, but now with Windows 10, XAML has become, the first-party OS experience. So all your experiences that you see, like Start and Search and Settings, and all of your first-party apps like Photos and Calculator, everything has been written on XAML at this point. So any the OS UI experiences, they're all built on XAML. It's the same platform that you get as a third-party developer to target. That's the same platform that is being used internally by Microsoft as well. So once again, it's not just about that. It's also about like other control vendors who make new controls. They use the XAML UI framework in order to build those kind of controls. We build a couple of controls in the framework and ship them, but there are also other control vendors out there and ecosystem partners who actually build more on top of us, and they all use the XAML platform. So just to show something like this here, that's the settings UI, and you can see that these are all the XAML elements that are being used in the settings UI right off the box. So everything that you get for free is actually what is being used in the OS experience as well. Great, so as an introduction, so the goal for Windows 10 has been to increase the reach and opportunity for anybody who is installing this particular OS has the potential to, the OS itself has a reach across all of these devices and device families out there. So that was the goal for Windows 10. But what does it mean for developers like you, and how have we extended that, internalized that concept that is brought into fore by the OS version, and how have we made it better for you as part of the platform, is by introducing the Universal Windows platform, which is now a unified and converged platform over which you can now develop apps that can target all of the devices that are supported by Windows 10. Basically, we have tried to reduce the developer cost, so you no longer need to write separate phone apps or separate Windows desktop apps, separate Xbox apps. You no longer need to do any of that. As long as you target the Universal Windows platform, you're good to go. You have the capability to now reach every device that supports Windows 10. So that has been the biggest goal for Universal Windows platform and XAML as a whole. So the thing that I want to call out here is that even if you are just targeting one platform, even if your goal is not to reach all of these devices, even if you just want to have an app that runs on the phone, you can still do that. And you can, by writing a UWP app, you still get to write, the app has the capability to run on phone, and in the store, you will be able to actually say that you don't want this app to be run on any other device, and all those capabilities still exist. But the advantage that you get is that because we now have a single unified platform, the ecosystem is now going to support you in terms of, you can now have the resources that were developed for desktop, or somebody written a new control for Xbox. All of that is also going to be available to you even as you are just a phone developer. So the resources that are existing out there and the ecosystem breadth is now available to you even if you're just targeting one platform. So those are all the kind of advantages that are lit up as part of this Universal Windows platform. Great. So what's new in XAML? There are a lot of new controls. We usually, there is a lot of shiny new stuff as usual when we ship a new version. And with Windows 10, we have a lot of new shiny new controls as well. Some of the things that are highlighted here is, the one on the left is kind of the perspective 3D camera animations that we've added into the platform, which is going to make it very easy for you to create very complex animation scenarios, like what you see in the start menu. The one on the right is kind of demoing the ink canvas. That's, once again, Joe's wry sense of humor that I'm just not able to channel at all. It's supposed to be a Christmas card from Terry to Joe, where he's used ink canvas. But just in addition to all the new and enhanced controls, enhanced features, new APIs that we've introduced into the platform, one other thing that I want to call out is that beyond just new controls, we've also been listening to you. We've been looking at all the customer feedback, all the user voice feedbacks that we've been getting, and we've just introduced a lot of intrinsic improvements into the platform itself, which is just going to light up for you for free. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those as well as we go on. Okay. So because this is a developer platform demo, the first thing that I wanted to show is some code before we talk more slides. Okay, so like I said, most of the inbox experiences are now XAML. So what does it mean? Let me just show you what it means for you. This is a PC that's running Windows 10. And if you go to your calendar, you can see that it's now, kind of updated with a new look and feel. You have a new calendar kind of an experience over here. And as a developer, you look at this and you say, okay, that's very cool. I want to get this kind of calendar experience in your app. So what do? Now it's going to be extremely simple. You go to Visual Studio. I'm going to launch Visual Studio for the first time. I'm going to say File, New Project. Right off the bat, I want you to notice that I'm creating a Visual C# app. And inside that, I have just a single node called Windows Universal. This is important because in previous releases, we've had Windows Universal nodes, but they have always had like multi-headed apps. You would probably have a Windows Phone app. You will notice that there is no Windows Phone app. There is no Windows Desktop app. There is no Xbox. There is no Surface Hub. All of those kind of distinctions are hidden behind the scenes for you, and only if you need to especially target them do you need to actually think about it at all. Right off the bat, it's a Windows Universal project, and an app is now capable of running across the breadth of all your Windows 10 devices. And when we are creating a new app, of course, the first app should always be a Hello World app. So let's create a Hello World app. In my Hello World app, I'm going to show you how extremely difficult and complicated it is to actually create that calendar that we just saw. Once Visual Studio is finished creating this new project, of course. Give it a little bit more time.
Question?
Sure.
Can you build these on a non-Windows 10 machine?
You need Visual Studio 2015 to start using some of these projects. If you are using some of our new APIs, then you would need to be at least deploying them against a Windows 10 OS. So you can develop some of these apps in any OS that you want, but you could deploy to a remote machine which can run Windows 10. Great. So now I have the app ready. What I'm going to do is go into mainpage.xaml, and then I'm going to write a lot of hairy code in order to get my calendar. Calendar view. Wow, that's difficult. There you go. So it's showing me on a 5-inch phone. Let's look at a 13.3-inch desktop. So that's my calendar. I've added a calendar that's exactly the same look and feel as the one that you see on the desktop. It's the same OS experience that you get for free. I'm going to quickly run it. So while it's running, you can see that this is the Visual Studio Designer experience that's kind of bringing in all of these new controls. Calendar view is one of the newest controls that we've added to the platform, and it's a shiny new thing as part of the platform. So you can see this is the calendar control. It has mouse-based interactions. I can do all kinds of animations like this. Every animation that you see that is built into the OS experience is available for free for you once you start using some of the built-in controls. It's also working for touch. just like I would expect. And because it's a universal app, we absolutely need to deploy it to my device. And I want to show you that, as part of the Universal Windows platform, you now have the capability of using our controls, just adding them to your app, and it's now going to be available to you with optimized look and feel and interaction models for your device and your user input models. So while that's loading, let me project my screen. And there you go. So that's my calendar view control that's running on this phone. This phone is also running a Windows 10 OS, and you can see that it has the same kind of touch interactions, the animations, everything works just like that. So that's my simple demo of the new control. What I'm going to show you next is a little more complicated. It's an app that Joe has written, which kind of showcases all the new controls that we have developed in the platform. So you can see that this kind of showcases a bunch of new controls. I'm going to deploy it and then walk you through some of the important and interesting controls over here. So you can see some of the common controls. There has been a little bit of an updated look and feel for some of these controls based on the new personality for Windows 10. You can see the checkbox, toggle switch. It has a little bit of a different personality type. The sliders are a little bit styled differently. So all of these are now part of the styling of new controls that is shipped as part of the platform itself. There are new text controls. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in depth about some of the converged controls that we have added to the Universal Windows platform and how we have managed to rationalize between the differences between the two platforms that existed before. And password box will be one of those examples that come up there. Choosers. We've had these kind of combo box, choose a date, and then you have this is the new look and feel for the date picker and the time picker controls. Previously, I think on desktop you used to have 3 combo boxes. On phone you used to have a whole view of carousel control. So we have kind of rationalized all of that and come up with a new model for date picker. This is the new updated look and feel for the date picker control. There are a couple of miscellaneous controls. We've always had command bar. You can see that on command bar. I'll show you in a bit when this particular app runs on the phone. There will be some experiences that have been optimized to take advantage of the single-handed use versus a desktop use kind of behavior, and command bar will be one of those things. You notice that on the command bar, because it's a big screen window, when I'm invoking the commands and there are secondary commands, it's going to overflow neatly into a small context menu over here. One other cool thing that we added, it might not be cool, but I just want to show it anyway. So one other cool thing that we added here is on the menu flyout. Like typical desktop app experiences, on Win32 desktop apps, you've always had this experience. XAML on WinRT, it's a little new, where you are actually rendering XAML content outside of the XAML page. So you're seeing that all of these kind of new, the cascading menu items are actually being rendered outside of the window that is hosting the XAML content. So that's something new that we've added. One other thing that I want to show here is, so notice that when I'm invoking this particular context menu, I've invoked it using mouse. And you can see that a little bit, all of these menu items are a little bit, denser and do not have a lot of margin around them. The hit targets are perfect for mouse. The minute I start invoking with touch, you can see that a little bit better spaced. And, the content is a little bit, the touch targets are a little bit bigger, which helps in invoking these kind of patterns using touch as well. So all of this experience is now built into the control. When you use some of our built-in controls like menu flyout and context menu, you're going to get these experiences for free. So let me quickly deploy this app on my phone because I want to show you one key difference. Oops. All right, so the one key difference that I really want to show is this guy over here, the command bar. When we invoked the secondary commands on the command bar on the desktop, you saw that it had a nice little small menu item that kind of cascaded over there. And on the phone, because it is single-handed use, we have optimized it to actually extend across the breadth of the device itself because it's easier for me to access it using thumb. So some of these kind of experiences have been built into the controls themselves. So you'll notice that for some of you who attended my session in the morning, I focused a lot about how you can build more responsive apps and how you can take advantage of better screen space. You will notice that this app currently does not take advantage of screen space because right now the user invocation model for actually seeing some of the content on the right is for me to go and toggle that button outside and then actually see this content. It's less than ideal. I would actually like for my app to take care of it in such a way that when my screen space is less available for me, I need my content to be optimized for that. So in my next couple of slides, I'll be walking through a little bit more about some of those things. So let me switch back to slides. Oh, and before that, so when Joe did his build talk, he had a fancy deployment into an IoT device and an Xbox device and all of that stuff. I didn't have access to all that fancy stuff, so I asked Joe for a quick screenshot where he's actually deploying the same universal controls app that you just saw on an IoT device. You can actually see a Raspberry Pi device over there and the Xbox over there, and that's Joe's office. I just asked for a screenshot, and it's just for bonus. Sorry? So the question was, is there a special license that is needed to deploy to Xbox at this point, or is the store open? I believe right now the store is not open for submission for taking Xbox apps. I don't believe the store is even open for desktop or mobile even. But once the platform is being built in such a way that you don't need an extra license or you don't need any extra mechanism. Once you create a UWP app, once you create a XAML app, it has the capability to just run on Xbox devices. All right, so the next section is going to be talking a little bit more in depth about how we got here. Previously in Windows 8 and 8.1, in Windows 8.1 at least, XAML was bifurcated. We had Windows Phone 8.1 controls, we had controls for Windows 8.1, and some were a little bit similar, some were a little bit different. Some existed only for phone, some didn't exist on desktop, some existed only on desktop, some did not, were not available for phone. So in order to get to a unified Windows platform, we had to make sure that we took a look at our entire control set and rationalize the differences and make sure that we come up with a converged experience. And I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples of how we have ended up there and what it means to you as developers. So one common example here is the password box. The one on the left is the Windows 8.1 password box, and the one on the right is the Phone 8.1 password box. You can see that even stylistically, they look very different. The kind of experiences that they had built into them was also very different. On the Windows 8.1 desktop, you had like a peek, kind of a reveal kind of button in there. On the phone, you see that there was a show password checkbox in there. So when we actually rationalized these kind of controls and we said that, okay, we have one platform, it's going to be one XAML, there's going to be one password box. What does it look like? What should it look like? What kind of experiences should we enable? And how do we not break apps when we actually move them forward? So in order to get to there, we the approach that we took more or less was sometimes we picked one based on whichever was the better design at that point and whichever made sense for Windows 10. And sometimes we actually went through a lot of the user voice data and a lot of data analysis to come up with what is the best possible representation in the new world of Windows 10 for this particular control. So in password box, the approach that we took was, you can see that we retained the Windows 8.1 desktop look and feel, updated it a little bit, and in order for phone apps to still get the behavior that was already there, we added some new APIs. Like by default, we are going to have hidden for the password reveal button. But because some apps might be depending on the password reveal mode to be shown, we added an API and a type that you can now set in order to opt into your old behaviors. So these are some of the ways that we have tried to make sure that backward compatibility has also been maintained. I believe that we have a big document that has been published into MSDN that contains all of the breaking changes and all of the upgrade kind of scenarios that we've enabled in these kind of patterns. And as addition to that, in addition to the convergence of two different controls, we've also introduced some newly universal controls. Like, for example, pivot. Pivot was a control that existed only on phone before. It has now been made a truly universal control. You can access a pivot control from your desktop apps as well, and any other device that is going to run Windows 10. But the way we have converged pivot is to make sure that it is going to be optimized for 100 use when you're on phone, and it is going to be used, optimized for desktop use when you're on the desktop. And we have built a lot of capability into the control to make it truly universal. Like you can see here, the dialer app on the phone today, when you're using a Windows 10 OS, it actually uses the XAML pivot control, and it has been styled to look like tabs on the dialer control. So there are a lot of different things that you can now do with a pivot control that you couldn't probably do before. We have actually published a couple of samples, I believe, that show you how to enable a kind of tabs-like experience using pivot. Another universal control that we have enabled is a content dialog control. A content dialog is a control that only existed on phone before. On desktop, you had to rely on message dialog, and message dialog did not support custom XAML content. So what we have done is we have brought in the content dialog control and made it universal. You can now create custom XAML content for modal dialog boxes like you used to on phone as well. And when you use these content dialog controls, they are going to look and feel and behave appropriately on the different devices that you run them on. Content dialog fans, I never would have thought. So the other one here is the auto-suggest box. So auto-suggest box was a control that existed only on phone. Search box was its equivalent on desktop. What we did was, of course, you had to pick one. We had to have either auto-suggest box or search box in the new universal model. So what we did was we retained the auto-suggest box, but we added some of the capabilities that were there in search box that were special to search box into the auto-suggest box control. So auto-suggest box now supports IMEs, it supports glyphs, like search box used to do. Search box as a control still exists in the SDK because a lot of apps might be depending on it from previous versions, but we are putting it on a path of deprecation so that people can now onboard on auto-suggest box, because auto-suggest box will be the control that we will be investing on in the future. And maps. Maps, we used to have all these different kinds of maps controls before. We had Nokia maps, we had Bing maps, we had all these kind of different maps. Now we have a single maps control. The single maps control combines the fantastic, awesome features of all the different maps, and it now provides all of them surfaced through, you have the offline modes, you have 3D imagery, there is street side panoramas, all of them are built into the maps control that is shipping as part of the SDK that you can now use on your Universal Windows app. Great. What's that? Offline maps? Yeah, you can actually use the maps control to create offline maps. On every device? Yes. Yeah. So, while we were coming up with this universal Windows platform and making XAML more universal, it's not just about rationalizing the controls and making them work, coming up with the look and feel for these controls and making sure that all of these controls were universal. Making them universal came with a lot more than that, and the one thing that's going to be about is how do these controls scale with respect to the types of inputs that you use to interact with these controls. And we have made sure that across these controls, you can interact with these controls, and you can interact with our apps in a way that is going to be intuitive for you, not just with touch, mouse, and pen, but also with all the other input paradigms that you're going to use for Windows 10 devices, like the gamepad and HoloLens or whatever it is. So we try to make sure that if you use a gamepad and you use a gamepad on an UWP XAML app on an Xbox, it is going to be a lot more intuitive for you to use it using gamepad. We are doing a lot of investments there. It's not fully done yet, we are still working on it, but we wanted to show you that we are investing such that a lot of this is for free for you. You don't, as a developer, have to think too hard about enabling input-specific differences for your app. A lot of these experiences are just going to light up for you for free. As part of these universal controls, you can now use these controls and build views. Obviously, some apps and some scenarios, it makes complete, perfect sense to just have a single view and it just magically works. As you can completely think of scenarios like calculator over here. There nothing's too specific about the calculator that you need to think of as specific to any device. As long as it just optimizes for the available space, a single app and a single view, as long as it is just responsive enough, it is just going to work across all your devices. And so we are saying that views may be reusable. You're not forced to tailor your app. You're not forced to create a specific phone version. You're not forced to create a specific desktop version unless you really want to. And there are scenarios where you will really want to, like, for example, the Photos app. In our Photos app, in the way we have built the Inbox app, you can see that it's optimized for one-handed use when it's on phone, and it's optimized for a productivity-based use when it's on desktop. And there are a couple of different ways that they have achieved this. I had a talk earlier this morning. For those of you who probably didn't make it to that, I actually have a little bit more in-depth talk about how do you achieve some of those scenarios there. Before I go further here, I actually want to just load it up and show you these differences on an actual. So this is my Windows 10 device. If you look at my Photos app, you will notice that right now it's showing in full screen, so it's having a nice little split view over here, where all my collections, it's all showing here, and my photos are organized in a way that makes sense for me when I'm using mouse and keyboard to interact with a desktop monitor. My commands are placed at the top right, so it's easy for me to invoke it. I can see it when I look at it from a standing distance. When I start resizing my window, you will notice that this app does a lot of funky things in order to actually rationalize for available space. This is a XAML app, and it uses all the XAML features that we are going to actually showcase. The same app, when I'm actually running it from my phone, you will notice that it's the exact same app, but the way it has been constructed is quite different from the way it's been constructed on the desktop. I'm trying to show a little bit side by side. So you can see that it's been constructed in a way that it is a little more tuned for a single-handed use, and whereas on the desktop it's more tuned for productivity-based use. Whereas if I just launch Calculator, the Calculator, it's a simple enough app. As I resize, it does a little bit of better adaptability and a little bit of responsive UI over here. But in general, when it is resized all the way down to a size that is appropriate for a phone device, this particular view can just be used as is on my phone device, and it would completely make sense. And in fact, that's exactly what they're doing. They haven't built anything specific for a different device at all. They just use the same exact UI that has been designed and created for a small, skinny window on the desktop and put it on the phone. I wanted to show both of these scenarios to you to show that even our Inbox apps have different kind of experiences in them. So for your apps and for your scenarios, I would like you to think about where you fall and how much of an investment you want to make in your app in order to take advantage of the Universal Windows platform. All right, so I'm going to, in the next couple of slides, I'm going to talk about a little bit about some of the new features that we've introduced in order for you to build more responsive Universal Windows apps. I had a session earlier this morning, like I said, which goes into a lot of detail. Here I'm going to skim through some of that, and I'm still going to reiterate a couple of things because there may be people here that weren't there in the previous session. We've introduced a couple of new APIs. The first one is the Split View API, which you just saw. It's kind of an adaptive navigation pane kind of an API. We have introduced it in order for you to build adaptive navigational patterns in your app. So the split view has a pane and a content. The pane can be positioned wherever you want. It can be on the left or it can be on the right. Typically, the pane is used to drive what is seen on the content. So typically, we might have a list of scenarios on the pane, and it's used to drive the content on the right-hand side. Split view has a couple of different display modes. Like you saw in the Photos app, you can have split view's display mode to be inline, where the pane is completely open and it is shown in line with the content. When it is overlay, the pane is going to overlay on top of the content. Or it could be compact inline, where it is coming into a very small skinny mode and it is still in line with the content. And we have introduced some new features called state triggers and setters, which we hope will simplify responsive UI development for your apps in markup. The the thing that I want to show you here is that in Visual State Manager, we have introduced a new API called State Trigger and Adaptive Trigger. Adaptive Trigger is the built-in trigger that we have that supports responding to UI changes based on window width and window height. That's the only trigger that we have that is built in. We've also created a lot of extensibility mechanisms for you, and you could create any kind of custom trigger that you want, and you can completely use it in your app as well. The setters are some of the new statements that you can use in order to create very small, discrete property changes directly inline in your markup in a very intuitive way. Previously, you had to use storyboards in order to achieve some of the same things. Relative panel is a new control which we have introduced that we hope will enable some of the easier responsive UI and kind of layout mechanisms for you. It's a layout mechanism that is kind of based on a constraint-based construct. So you can now create elements and position them relative to each other. So the example here shows a small clip, small screenshot which has been tried. Somebody has tried to create it using a grid, and within that you have a nested stack panel and a couple of text blocks and buttons in there. The more panels that you have in your layout, the more perf expense it is going to be, because it's just more elements in your layout. So relative panel enables you to minimize the number of nested panels that you would need in your app, and it also helps you to position your UI elements a little bit more easily. So for example, the same UI, if you had to create using relative panel, you would just have relative panel, you would put your image in there, and then you would add your text block and say relative panel.writeOff image, and say align top with the image. So you can have like positional sibling relationships here. And for my second text block, which is the author's text block, I'd say it is right off the image, and it is actually below my title. The third text block is once again right off my image, and it's below my author's text block. So you can notice that I'm actually using the named references to refer to each of these elements. And for the button, I want it to be at the bottom, so I'm saying make it right off the image, and I say align bottom with panel equals true, which is some of the parent relationship properties that we've introduced in relative panel as well. So you can use relative panel with triggers and setters in order to create more advanced responsive UI techniques. My talk earlier this morning had a lot of more examples and how, a lot more demos on how you can actually achieve some of these experiences. Joe also has a small demo here, which I will quickly show you before moving on. So here is a small app. Right now on the design surface, you don't see anything because it's all completely data bound, and it is all the data is coming from a service from the back end. In my XAML, you can see that it's using a split view, and in my split view, I'm using a list view with a bunch of with the relative panel with a lot of content in it. Let me quickly run this app, show you what the experience is looking like. So you can see that right off the bat, you have this app, and it looks good when the window is slightly big. But the minute I start to reduce the size of the window, the UI starts getting a little bit ugly, because my text box, the text in my text block, it's all running over my buttons, and it's not really optimized for available screen space. So there's a lot I can do here in terms of improving this particular scenario. So the two things that I'm going to show you that I'm going to improve here are I'm actually going to add an adaptive trigger here so you can see that I have added a small snippet which shows me a wide state and a narrow state. It's two states where I'm using the setters, which are the new syntax, which have simplified setting property values from markup. The values that I'm changing are the split views display mode value to be inline when I have more available space, and the pane to be open when I have more available space. And I'm changing the split views display mode to be overlay when I have lesser available space, and I'm also making sure that the pane is not open when my space is lesser. The triggers that I'm using are the new adaptive trigger mechanisms, where I'm saying that please apply my narrow state if my window width is anything that is greater than greater than or equal to 0 effective pixels, but less than 720 effective pixels. When the window width is greater than or equal to 720 effective pixels, the white state needs to be applied. So this is the small amount of code that you need to write, the small amount of markup, and with this, you have enabled a very easy adaptive experience on your split view. One other thing that I'm going to change is, we saw that the text block could have a little bit more optimization based on available space. So one thing that I'm going to do here is, you see that each of these is inside an item template and which has a data template. The one thing that we don't have support for at this point, and we are looking to add support for, is Visual State Manager cannot be added inside a data template. So you cannot support like adaptive experiences right inside a template. But what you can do instead is just take your template and put it inside a user control. I have a brand new user control over here, and all I'm doing is I'm just putting the same data template inside my user control, and I'm going to just say local book item view over here, and just refer to that user control instead. So inside my user control, I now have the capability to use VSM once again. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to quickly copy the snippet. So you can see that I have Visual State Manager once again with a wide state and a narrow state. The only property that I'm changing is the max lines property on my summary text block to be a little greater if I have more available space and to be a little lesser if I have less available space. Let me now quickly run this app. And you can see that, when I have lesser available space, the UI now looks much cleaner and more adaptive and just works. You can see that the split view was also going into, inline and overlay mode as and when we resize this window. That's a short, quick demo for the adaptive experiences. Switching back to the slide deck. All right, so we've talked about the new controls, we've talked about some of the universal controls, we've talked about responsive apps, what are the new features we've introduced there, and the next big topic is going to be what are the enhancements that we have done in the framework in order to help apps become faster and more performant. We've done a lot of investments in the framework this release. It's been one of our pivotal experiences that we have tried to enable, primarily because, like I've been saying, all of our inbox experiences, the OS experiences, are now built on top of XAML. What that means is that everybody who is going to run a Windows 10 device and launch a start is going to experience XAML performance. So we have to make sure that start loads up in a fraction of a second. And it has to happen by making sure that XAML as a framework is light, thin, and extremely, extremely light, basically. So because we have all of these first-party experiences that are built on top of XAML, as third-party developers, you get all of these gains for free. So any investment that we make in order to make the framework faster is going to be something that just lights up for all third-party apps as well. In addition to some of the implicit gains, we have also introduced a couple of new features that you can explicitly opt into in order to make your apps a little more faster when you're building on top of Windows 10. Some of these features include some improvements we have done to binding. So this was kind of the binding syntax that you used to use before. Bindings are basically string-based. They are not good at all for perf because every binding that you have is the way it is evaluated is based on a runtime lookup. So when you actually run your app, we actually go and look it up as a string-based system and then come back and say, and because it's a runtime lookup, once again, you get exceptions when you run your app if you have used some kind of, if you have misspelled your binding. For example, instead of symbol, if I had written SYMBL, I wouldn't know that it was spelled wrong until I actually run the app and see that it was wrong. And this was because bindings were runtime lookups. And of course, because they are runtime lookups, and we had to resolve each of those bindings at runtime, it is extremely expensive. So we tried to see what we could do better here, because a lot of apps are used to bindings. People are used to doing MVVM, and we want people to, do whatever they're comfortable doing. So we want to make sure that we want to enable the things in the framework that just makes the things that people use a little bit faster. And this was one of the areas where we invested in. What we've introduced is x:/bind. This is a new binding syntax, which just makes it faster to use bindings. It's basically compiled bindings, which means Now, when you're actually creating these kind of bindings over here, we resolve them at compile time. So if you misspelled, for example, symbol, now you will actually get squiggly lines in Visual Studio, and you will be shown that it's a compile time error. So you can immediately fix it instead of waiting for your app to throw you an exception and then figuring out what happened. Cool. There are a lot more performance-based improvements that you get because of x:bind. Sam Spencer and Chipala Street had an excellent talk at Build, which went into a lot of depth about so many scenarios around this. So I would really encourage you to take a look at that if you're interested in some of these scenarios. Great, so that's one. What about other UI features? We have added a bunch of new UI features. One which I showed a while back when I gave you a small intro, which is the Perspective Transform 3D. You can see this effect being, you can see this effect right now if you're launching Start on your Windows 10 PC, and you can see the tiles rotating in a certain way with a certain animation around them. All these fancy 3D animations, they're all now built in. And we have APIs that you can use as third-party developers to get the same experience that Start ships out of the OS. We already had Perspective Transform in XAML. With that, you can transform any one element in 3D space. So you could have done something like that. If you wanted to do this on multiple elements, say n elements, you had to create n perspective transforms and apply them on all of these elements. If you wanted animations on them, you had to create m animations on n elements and then try to create some kind of experience around that. And they would all apply individually. This was the experience that we had before. So if you wanted to create some kind of combinatorial, animation that was smoothly playing all over when n elements were being modified in perspective transform, good luck with that. It was very, very difficult and hairy to do, which was something similar to what Start was trying to do. So I'm quoting this example primarily because, because Start wanted this experience, and because Start uses XAML, you now get this experience for free because we built it into the framework, we built it as an API, and now third-party developers can use it as well. So a lot of these fantastic requirements are coming from our inbox apps and inbox experiences that you are now able to leverage as part of the third-party ecosystem as well. So the Perspective Transform 3D is a new API that is going to help you actually build those kind of experiences which are a little more, very complicated to do with the APIs that you have today. Windowing. So because we now, we have windowing in your apps, how many people like windowing? Now that you can resize windows to any size you want on the desktop? Cool. So with that, you also get, what are the things that you can do with respect to Chrome? So you had all of these capabilities before with your Win32 apps. You could style your Chrome to be any kind of custom Chrome. We now allow you to do that as well. Creating custom Chrome, creating branding, and creating sizing for your windows, it's all going to be pretty easy for you and baked into the platform. I think I have a demo right after this which shows some of the experiences of how to create your own custom Chrome and how you can actually enable those kind of scenarios as well. Ink Canvas. This is once again the Christmas card makes an appearance. Oh, sorry.
Can the minimize, maximize, and close button are also be styled?
No, unfortunately. So the question was, can the minimize, maximize, and close buttons be styled? No, the minimize, maximize, and close buttons at this point cannot be styled, and they come with the system themes at this point. You would see that in the demo as well. The thing that you can actually style is the Chrome itself. So in Canvas, we had some kind of inking capabilities made available to you as part of the platform before, but they were lacking in a lot of respects. There was a lot of latency. It was just not right. It was not, we hadn't invested in it the right amount of ways before. What we've done now is we have completely, revamped and re-architected the inking experience, and we have now introduced Ink Canvas as a control. You just add Ink Canvas in your app, and you can now have a very, very premier inking experience that you can enable from XAML. It supports palm rejection, it does smoothing, it does very high fidelity and high inking experiences basically using this control. Drag and drop, so it's been extended for windowed apps. Previously, we did not support app to app or desktop and from a different kind of an app to XAML app drag and drop experiences. These are all being enabled now. So you can actually, with very simple APIs, you can achieve dragging of any element from your desktop and into your XAML app or vice versa. And we've enabled these kind of experiences in box. Okay, with that, we'll go to our next demo, which is going to be about Perspective 3D and the windowing aspects of it. All right, so that will be this guy. So this is an app which uses Perspective 3D in each of these kind of elements that you see here. You see this design experience, and let me quickly run this app and actually show you what it looks like. So this is my app. You can see that when I click on each of these boxes, it rotates with a particular transform, and this is the Perspective Transform 3D being applied to these elements. It's extremely easy to use. It's like, I think, 4 lines of XAML for each of these text blocks, and each of these items are able to rotate in such a way in a very easy fashion. You see these kind of smooth animations in here, and you also notice the custom Chrome that's been added over here. Like you see, the minimize, maximize, and close buttons do not get the same visuals. It's only about the Chrome itself.
It doesn't look really nice. So if I change the color of the Chrome and the buttons will stay in the white color.
Excellent. You know what you should do? You should please give us that feedback, and we will improve it. So let me quickly show you, I think. So you can see that I'm using the Perspective Transform 3D over here, and I'm going to apply it on each of these items. It's as simple as that. The custom title bar has been added. It's just an item that's sitting here, and I'm going to position it inside my custom Chrome using the syntax that I showed you on the slide earlier. Awesome. Switching back. Few other miscellaneous improvements we've done. So XAML WebView. So WebView is a XAML control that you used to use in order to display HTML content in your XAML app. That's a control that has been enhanced now with support for the Edge engine. So Edge is, I believe everybody now knows that Edge is the new Internet Explorer, and it comes with a very highly enhanced Edge engine. So when you now use the XAML WebView control, you get access to the Edge engine, and you get access to WinRT APIs that are being exposed as part of the Edge engine as well. So you can now access WinRT from within your WebView controls content, which was not possible earlier. There have been a bunch of improvements that have been done to Visual Studio that enable some of the your Universal Windows app platform, and we have tried to leverage a lot of that. This slide basically shows you a little bit about the views that you can create, and you can actually, even if you don't have access to all of these different devices and device families that are supported by Windows 10, just using Visual Studio's preview and the design tool, you can now actually see what your app is going to look like across the smattering of the device families, and you can try to optimize your app's UI and screen usage based on that. You don't have to run your app. You don't have to have a machine that actually has, you don't have to have an Xbox in order to see what your app is going to look like on an Xbox. There is a bunch of other things, that actually shows there. There's a bunch of other things that Visual Studio has also introduced, like I think the timeline tool. There's a lot of perf features that have been added. There were a couple of talks at Build which went into a lot of detail about all of these new tools that were added to Visual Studio for perf. I think Kiran Kumar and Mark Alcazar did a very, very detailed talk on XAML performance, which used this tool a lot. So if you're interested in improving the performance of your app, I would sincerely suggest you to go and check it out. It's a video that's available on Channel 9. Another key thing that has been introduced in Visual Studio is the tree inspector. So a lot of times, maybe when you're creating a very complex app which has a bunch of different views in it and very modularized user controls that are all over the place, sometimes you get lost when you actually look at your content that is getting rendered. There may be a couple of things that are off place and you don't know where it's coming from. Maybe there was a margin that was coming from some place that was in a style, or maybe it was coming from some place, a text block that had a text that was wrong, or whatever it was. And it used to be very, very difficult in order for you to debug your view, your UI. What Visual Studio has now introduced is the Visual Tree Inspector, which I will demo for you in just this second, which you can now use to create. So let me run my app. This is the Fresh Perspective app that we just saw that was running. So this is the app. and you can now see that I have my live visual tree that is getting updated when I run this app. You can see that when I pick on something, did it get attached? Okay, so now I'm enabling selection. So now you can see when I select something, I can actually see what that element is. It's getting highlighted over here. When I go here and I look at the Live Property Explorer, it's getting loaded slowly. Okay, there you go. So in my Live Property Explorer, I'm actually seeing the item that I selected. Let me select it once again. So you can see that when I select Terry Myerson, that was a text block that I selected. It has a text. It shows me the font size, what kind of margins it has, and I can actually change some of these things. I can say change this font size to maybe make it 20. And I should be able to see that getting applied on my text block here. Do we see it? Sure. So there's no mode actually. You can now enable the visuals tree by going into Debug, Windows, Live Visual Tree. So as long as you run your app and then just launch this, you can now see your visual tree right away.
Can you debug the bindings that way too?
Yep.
You're using the old style binding.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so these are all key new features that have been added. I think there was a very detailed talk from the Visual Studio team that actually showed some of these features in more detail as well at Build. So the other thing that I quickly wanted to show you was, let me switch to x86. And so this was the universal app that we kind of demoed a little bit earlier. So I wanted to show you some of these other devices that you can actually pick on. So right now I'm showing it on a 13.3-inch desktop window. And all of these scale factors applied. So this is kind of what the app is going to look like in this particular device. So if I switch it and say I want to look at what this app is going to look like when it's running on an Xbox. So you can directly see this on the design surface using some of these device families over here. I want to see what it looks like on a Surface Hub. That's going to be huge. So how am I going to optimize your UI? That's my headache, but those kind of things. You can now use Visual Studio and the design tools to actually see some of these things. Switching back, we did the demo. Yep, and with that, I think we are towards the end of our session where, we just wanted to call out a couple of more things that we've added. We have updated a lot of things about command bar, which was an existing control. We have made sure a lot of you had asked for being able to add a text box into a command bar, so that's now supported. We've added it for you. Vector fonts are now supported. A smattering of new APIs and API enhancements have been added. These are all part of bringing together and converging the platform, as well as improving the platform based on your feedback as well. So I would encourage you to all try it out. Use UWP, create XAML apps. Let us know, provide all the feedback, and we would like to totally take your feedback and improve the platform. Yes, questions? Uh-huh.
Does the text box, does it support inking in the text box? And further up, would a text box somehow be able to be incorporated to allow voice input?
Great question. Today, text box does not support inking capabilities. You would have to create your own custom version of your text box, maybe incorporate the ink canvas in there in order to enable some kind of experience like that. But it supports touch. So when you touch your text box, you're going to get the SIP come up and actually interact with it. All the devices that support touch and have a text box will get that SIP experience for you. It's just that inking is not going to be supported there.
It's like normal way, like
to
touch it.
Yep, and you have a keyboard, software keyboard.
Kind of inking thing and then read from it.
Yep. Thank you. Yes.
In the old 8.1 apps, you couldn't choose
So JavaScript and HTML apps are still supported. You can still create Windows 10 apps using HTML and JavaScript. It's just that XAML has become the premier platform for Windows 10 apps and app experiences. So a lot of investments is going into XAML, primarily because all of our inbox experiences are based on XAML, and XAML is the platform that we are kind of projecting out there. HTML and JavaScript apps we are suggesting as an alternative for people who have web apps already, websites, and they are bringing it forward. A lot of these investments, I think, a lot of the convergence and the unified platform version of it has also been done for HTML and JavaScript as well. So you would get a lot of this, but you may not have as advanced improvements that we have introduced into the new platform in XAML as you get it for HTML and JavaScript. Any more questions? Yes? It's based off the normal.
So do you have any plans to open source them like Docker?
We'll have to think about that. I wouldn't know how to answer that question. We'll have to think about that. Yes?
So if you're creating a new application, should I go with WPF or
It totally depends on who you are targeting. If you want your app to be running on Windows 10 devices, you could choose whichever platform that you're comfortable in. We would encourage you to switch to UWP because that's a new platform. That's where the investments are happening. WPF is a little bit legacy. We are not really investing that much. Yes? Uh-huh. So all Office apps are actually built on top of XAML. So Word, the new Office apps are all XAML apps. Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, all of that. There was actually an excellent build talk where the people from Office came and talked about what their experience was in building XAML, building on top of XAML. It doesn't affect using Xamarin at all. You can use Xamarin to target XAML apps. So if you are interested in creating a cross-platform app across iOS, Android, and Windows 10, you should totally use Xamarin. So XAML is the platform. So Xamarin supports XAML. You would use Xamarin instead of Visual Studio, for example. Yeah. No. So all of these new APIs that you're going to use, all of these kind of updated looks and feel is going to be available only for Windows 10 devices. But your Windows 8 and 8.1 apps will still continue to run, though, on Windows 10 devices, yes. Excellent. Thank you. Have a fantastic weekend.